The humid heat nearly took my breath away as I stepped out of the terminal of the airport into the parking lot to look for Victor, Molly's driver. I felt like I'd just returned from a trip to the moon and had finally landed, victorious and exhausted. This trip was different from all the vacations I'd taken to visit Molly. I now knew what paradise would look like. This time, I was not going for a vacation, but to live permanently on 600 acres of banana and coconut trees in the middle of the Yucatan jungle, a place that I had lusted after for so long that my heart was already there. Victor spotted me and drove up to the front of the terminal. I smiled as he jumped out of the front seat and got out to open the rear door of the car for me.
Hola, señora.
Hola, Victor.
Hace calor hoy.
Sí. The tar melting on the pavement of the parking lot in the intense afternoon sunlight was a blessing compared to the February ice and cold I left behind in St. Louis. I would never have to wear a winter coat again. I sighed and settled into the seat of Molly's blue Lincoln as Victor started the engine, turned up the ranchero music on the radio, and pulled the car out of the parking lot. I tingled with excitement as we started down the shoulderless highway, preparing myself for the long ride past the endless rows of scruffy trees and billboards as we headed further south. Soon the billboards would disappear, and the jungle would stretch out like the sea on both sides of the road. The tension that had built up over the past 2 months as I extracted myself from a lifetime in St. Louis started to fall away. I could feel my shoulders start to relax. The wind blew warm whispers through the car window as Victor drove. I'd never have to leave again. I was inspired by the tropical beauty and the stretches of time that were the Mexican commodity. A white stucco house with 1.5 miles of isolated beach that bordered the property would be my permanent backyard. I closed my eyes, imagining walking through the front door of my house again, stepping into the entryway, looking up at the high-arched ceiling, down at the marble floors, and around at the curved wall of the living room to the Mexican tile in the kitchen. I was already anticipating the warmth of the architecture and the smell of the voluptuous garden just outside the dining room wall of windows. It was a dream house, one I could never have afforded in the States.
Agua, señora?
Victor asked, offering a cold bottle of water over the front seat of the car to me. No, gracias. I would wait until I got home to have a long, quenching glass of water in my own kitchen. Home. How delicious. A place so remote and isolated that only those that had been told about it would know it was there, set back into the jungle 1.5 miles down the road. It was a world of blue sky and smell and sounds of the jungle and the sea. La música es bien, I said to Victor, practicing one of the few phrases I had learned recently in Spanish. He nodded in agreement and turned up the volume. I was uncomfortable being chauffeured, and wished Molly could have come to the airport for me herself, but I was grateful that she had sent Victor and spared me the expense of a cab. I was riding in a car on my way to remaking myself into the person I longed to be. Free from the expectations of family and friends, far from my Midwestern suburban roots. I couldn't wait to see Molly, to settle into a routine as her full-time neighbor and employee. I wanted to become more like her over time, able to navigate in Spanish, preparing Mexican recipes that tasted as though I'd grown up cooking them, and reciting the stories of the native Mayans who lived on the ranch and came from little villages in the jungle. I was impatient to get started on the new iteration of my life. I watched the scruffy trees scurry by as we traveled down the 2-lane highway south of the airport, thinking that Molly and I had lived such different lives since we'd been neighbors in our early 20s. She had lived in the jungle for more than 10 years, when nothing existed on her property but their house. I admired her for the risks she'd taken and the way she'd adapted to change. Now we'd be counting on each other. She would help me learn about Mexico, how to navigate the challenges of living in a foreign country. I would help by being her friend. She had felt so vulnerable after her husband's heart attack. The silver bracelet on my wrist jangled as I shifted positions. I remembered making the purchase last minute at Cancun Airport before going back to St. Louis on my last visit. I'd never taken it off since that day because it reminded me of the ranch and my visits there, a shiny promise of more to come.